What is God's middle knowledge? Middle knowledge is what is in the middle between what God knows could happen, what he ultimately knows will happen, and what middle knowledge is what God knows what would happen. So God knows what could be. He could have made a different world and universe where the when it was nighttime out, instead of the sky being black, it was gray, or where the grass, instead of it being green, was pink. God knows what could happen. God knows ultimately what will happen. We know this from foreknowledge. We see this all over Scripture. God giving prophecies and the prophecies coming to fulfillment. We see from, I believe it's Romans 8:28, or at least it's in the book of Romans, that whom God foreknew, he also predestined. We know that God is able to know what eventually will happen, but God also knows what would happen. So this means that God knows what would happen if we were born in a different era altogether. He knows what would happen if we were presented in a certain situation, such as Peter. Would we have denied Christ 3 times, or would we have refrained from doing so? God knows what we would have been had we been born in the 1400s and what profession we would have taken. God knows what would happen if we choose tomorrow to go to a theme park, or if we choose to go to a coffee shop. He knows what would happen as far as interactions that would take place, whether we would have any complications with our vehicle of getting there, who we would accompany and take with. God knows all these things that would happen, but would happen does not mean what will happen. Because God is able to understand in a moment's notice. He's able to see all things of what would happen. And when we take this back to God, before God created the heavens and the earth, from Genesis 1:1 declares, we know that God knows all these truth claims that would be had he created the world in such a way and permitted certain things to occur otherwise. And so we know that before God created, we know that God creates based upon who he is. We know that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, John 1:1. And the Word is Logos. Logos is logic, and how God creates is always logical because he himself is logic. And so God is logically able to assess what will be based upon what is logical. God can't do what is illogical. He can't do what is logically impossible. And so what God creates is always done logically. Now, when God creates, he also knows all these different possibilities, which we can refer to as the multiverse, so to speak. The multiverse is real insofar as the standpoint of possibility and potentiality, but not in actuality. There's no such thing as a multiverse out there. However, God's knowledge is differentiated from his sight. What God sees is that which will be. It is what is actualized, actually brought out into the physical realm. But what God knows is not necessarily what he sees. God can know what would happen. And so God knows all these possible worlds of potential differentiations, of placing each and every one of us in different points in time and space. And then he perceives and knows and understands this perfectly in a moment's notice. It's all before him, and he logically creates the best possible world in which the most amount of libertarian free will creatures will choose him at the end of the day. And because we know from Isaiah that God knows the beginning to the end, because he declares the end from the beginning. So everything is brought out upon a possibility spectrum before God. But then what God chooses to see is what is actualized, and it is the real world in which we exist and live and move and have our being. And we can come to understand this very simply. We ourselves know what would happen if we put an MLS soccer team against a U6 rec team and both play to the best capabilities of their ability to do so. We know what would happen if that were to occur tomorrow. However, that's not going to occur tomorrow. And so God is also able to know all these different possibilities and variations of what would happen because he himself is the basis and standard of wisdom and knowledge, and he learns nothing from no one. We know from Isaiah 40, who has taught him? Who has brought counselors before him? No one. God is the basis. He is the unlearned person who is perfect and has all knowledge. He is all-knowing in all ways. And so by understanding this, we come to understand that God's middle knowledge is a reality that he truly possesses. We know this from scriptures such as 1 Samuel 23, where David goes before God and says, if I go to this city, will the men give me over to Saul, King Saul, when King Saul is chasing him down and trying to kill him? And David says, yes, that will happen. So what does David do instead? He flees the city. And so what happened? God made a truth claim of what would have happened had David gone to the city, but David did not go to the city. So this reveals God's middle knowledge, which is between what could happen and what will happen, and God's middle knowledge is what would happen. And a proper understanding of this, once you grab hold of this, it is a mind-expanding reality, because God has all knowledge not only in what will eventually be, not only in what could be, but he has all knowledge in regards to all variations and possibilities of anything and everything at any given time in any given way. This is mind-blowing. And God, we know, does not grow weary or tired or faint. We know his understanding is unsearchable. And he is the great God. He is the eternal one to whom, because of him, exists all things. And he is the omniscient one who truly not only knows what eventually will happen, not only knows what could happen, but he also possesses middle knowledge. And he knows what would happen with anything and everything.